One of the most important measures of river health is often invisible on the surface, but river grass is the focus of an upcoming river expedition. And here to talk about it, I'm joined by St. John's Riverkeeper, Lisa Rinaman. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you back. So, we hear about river grasses often in regards to manatees, which feed off of them and has caused stress and even starvation. But what is the role of river grasses overall?
Sure. So, our river grasses, they're the kidneys of the river. And so they're very important biofilters to filter out pollution, but they're also critical habitat not only for manatees, but also all of our recreational and commercial fisheries. Our seafood industry, the foundation, are these river grasses. So they're extremely important to river health, but also our economy.
And so, you are tracking the health of these river grasses, and they're not doing real well right now.
They are not. We've been tracking the decline of river grasses or SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, for over, the last decade and really been concerned initially about saltwater intrusion. We're seeing grasses disappear in Duval County and as far south as North St. Johns and Clay County. But after Hurricane Irma, there was actually devastation of river grasses for over 100 miles in the St. Johns. And those grasses haven't come back as well as they should. And so it really opened up our eyes to there's multiple stressors to the important ecological features of our river.
I want to talk more about saltwater intrusion in a minute, but I had seen some numbers about Irma. It said that the St. John's typically flows, 2 to 11 billion gallons a day, kind of depending on various factors. But during Irma, that hit 88 billion. And I didn't realize that river flow can actually kind of just scour the river bottom and those grasses.
Absolutely. When you have that much force going through the river, it can devastate the grasses and have that short-term impact. But what we also saw after Irma is water levels were higher for a longer period of time, and the water was darker due to all of this tannins and stuff coming in, sediments coming out of the swamps. And so that higher, darker water blocked sunlight from getting down to the river bottom that could have helped bring these grasses back.
Interesting. And then I would guess there was a lot of pollution that happened during that storm. All of those places that flooded, all that went somewhere.
Absolutely. And then also we had storms Ian and Nicole. While we were not hit as much as we could have been in Central Florida, they were devastated. And you had millions of gallons of raw sewage dumped in the river, and that increases nutrient pollution, increases toxic blue-green algae, what also blocks out light from getting down to these critical grasses.
Saltwater intrusion is something that we're seeing in a lot of places in Florida right now, partly because of rising sea levels and the way that that water can kind of force its way up into our systems. But talk about what happened with the dredging of the St. Johns River for the port.
Sure. When you dredge the river, you go deeper, wider. We've straightened the river. We've taken out sandbars. All of those are natural protections for too much of the Atlantic Ocean coming too far inland. And when you take all that out, when you create a superhighway for larger ships, you also create a superhighway for the Atlantic Ocean to push with more tidal force, more salt water into the St. Johns River further and further upstream. In fact, the tide range for the St. Johns has more than doubled since we've been dredging the river for more than 100 years to accommodate the port. They can coexist, but we have to make sure we're understanding what those upstream impacts are from our downstream actions.
So there are some solutions that have been proposed for the salinity issue, and one of those would be releasing the Ocklawaha River.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Explain how that flows and kind of what that would do.
Sure. If you reunite Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. Johns River, that will basically restore the natural flow of spring water coming from Silver Springs and release more than 20 springs that are drowned out due to the dam and the pool. And that'll restore 150 million gallons every single day of fresh, clear, cooler water to the St. Johns River system, which will help offset the saltwater intrusion and also provide more fresh water to help these struggling grasses.
And the Ocklawaha was dammed, and then the kind of that channel was dredged. Initially, there was going to be a barge canal that was built.
That's right. They were going to build a barge canal across the peninsula of Florida, just like the Panama Canal. Luckily, that was stopped by President Nixon in 1972. But the dam remains in place, and every day it's basically like a tourniquet on the Ocklawaha River. It's hurting the St. Johns River and Silver Springs, and so restoration will help 4 different ecosystems, and why we continue to try to reunite the rivers.
But there still remains a fair amount of opposition to that.
It's changing. We've been working diligently with more than 60 organizations on a regional solution to really change the conversation from what will be lost to what will be gained. And we're very hopeful. We're seeing more and more people realize that there's beneficial opportunities both environmentally but also economically with more ecotourism restoration and helping restore the St. Johns River as the bass fishing capital of the world.
Got a call from our friend Stanley. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Yes, and you're doing a fantastic job too. Yes, when it comes to the river there, why are we not doing marketing to the regular citizen and educate them on the river? And also, my main question is my main comment is access to the river. Because John and I, we go down the river. I'm saying we're not walking down the side. We go down in a kayak. So we're a little more knowledgeable about what's going on in the river. But when it comes talking to people in the leadership, they're not interested in the private citizen concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. Lisa, I remember former Mayor John Delaney talking about what a transformative experience it was for him personally to go and explore the river and see it in a way that he hadn't seen it before, from a friend who took him boating. And that really was the root of, an enormous preservation project that he undertook.
Absolutely. The best place to talk about the river is getting out on the river. And Stanley's right. We need to have more access. We need to have more opportunities to get out on the river. We've been working on the Ribault River with part of the Resilient Ribault Project with LISC Jacksonville. It's sort of a mini project for Resilient Jacksonville, but really focusing on getting community leaders out on the river and getting elected officials on the river to help not only provide more access and provide more enhancement to local parks that are on the waterfront, but also what can we do to protect the communities and make the rivers healthier, as well as all the communities that depend on our healthy waterways. So Stanley's absolutely right. We need more access.
I want to ask you about this idea of fencing some grasses, because I was fascinated to learn that while we think of manatees as requiring this grass to survive, they're also a threat to this grass. And in some cases, the state has created kind of barriers so that they can't get to it.
Yeah, and I hate to say they're a threat, but they're also part of the equation. I mean, with the grasses have multiple stressors, and what we're finding out when you have saltwater intrusion, when you have higher, darker water, you have too many nutrients and algal blooms, all of these stresses are stunting the river's grass's growth. And so they're succumbing to grazing pressure. And it's not just manatees, it's also turtles. You have invasive tilapia pulling up the grasses from the root. And so what we're looking at is the grasses are just, if you go out there, you can find them, but if they're not protected from the grazers, it looks like a lawnmower has just gone over the top of them. They're only about 2 inches tall. And so what we're looking at is trying to fence off sections along an 80-mile stretch of the river so the grasses can come back, they can thrive, they can grow tall enough that they can spread, and they need enough energy to do the spreading so we can have more habitat, more food sources for manatees and turtles. And we're working very closely with our manatee experts, both in the agencies as well as organizations like Save the Manatee, to make sure this is a long-term strategy to help provide more grasses and food sources for manatees.
And so is that a fairly new initiative, the fencing of these areas, and what results have been seen so far?
Yeah, so FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, they started doing this a couple years ago, and we've been tracking it. And several of our sites have an existing fence so far, and one in particular in Dancy Point at East Palatka, the river grasses outside the fence, they were struggling to get, never even got it 3 inches tall over our tour last year. We went and measured these sites over a 6-month period. When we came back at the end of the year, inside the fences, the grasses were more than 100 centimeters. They went all the way up your arm. So it's definitely helping, but it's only part of the solution. We have to reduce stress and also provide grasses enough energy so they can spread.
So there's an invasive species you mentioned called blue tilapia, which has become a real problem when it comes to these grasses. I guess not so much because they eat them, but because they burrow in them?
They do a little bit of both. There have been studies where they find these eelgrass or river grasses in the stomachs of tilapia, but they definitely, they build like spawning pits, and that's how the males, they mark their territory. And so they actually go and disturb the river bottom. They pull out the grasses by the roots, and that creates more sedimentation. There's more dirt stirred up in the river that blocks sunlight. And so it's just a domino effect. And we're seeing these invasive fish thrive throughout the St. Johns River system and then up into Silver Springs. It's a real problem.
And like a lot of invasive species, it's sort of introduced because it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yes, it was introduced for weed control, basically floating vegetation, as well as they were farmed in some areas. And so, because they are a popular food source, now the Water Management District and the agencies are actually hiring fishermen to come and harvest these tilapia because it actually not only reduces the risk to our river grasses, it takes out nutrients of the system, but the fishermen are struggling to keep up because the numbers are thriving in the warmer waters of the St. Johns.
And I was shocked to see how much of the population of Silver Spring they now make up those invasive tilapia.
Oh, it's mind blowing. Same in the Upper St. Johns. There was a study recently, and it was more than 90% invasive fish. And so when you have invasive fish coming into your system, there's unintended consequences like we're talking about with the grasses, but they also can thrive in areas and actually grow better than our native fish. And so it's negative to our native fish populations that need their habitat. And so it's just a really, really challenging situation we find ourselves in.
It's astonishing to think that that would be 90% of the population of fish in the.
And it was tilapia as well as armored catfish and other invasives. So just it's really a problematic state. And if we don't get our river back in a balance, it allows these invasive species to thrive where our native fish population is not doing so well because they need this habitat. They need a perfect balance of salt and fresh water. They need fresh water. And so we need to get our river back in balance to help the grasses, which will in turn help our native fish population like American shad, American eel, largemouth bass, striped bass, and others.
So let's talk about this expedition that's coming up. The Riverkeeper does this each year. What is it, and what's the goal?
Sure. So the goal is to find out as much information about these grasses that we can and also get water quality information at each site. We do this by going to nearly 15 sites over an 80-mile stretch of the St. Johns over a 4-day period. And so we'll leave on Tuesday, May 28th, and we'll start in Doctor's Lake. And we go to house, we visit by dock. And so the added benefit of this tour is we stop at people's homes. So we meet with them on their river. We sit there every single time we go to the same location, and we take water quality measurements. We get into the river. We look for grasses. When we find them, we measure them in density and canopy height. And then we go back and do that for 2 additional times this year so we can look at how the grasses are doing in Doctor's Lake, how they're doing in Fruit Cove, Palatka, Willaca, Lake George, and compare all of that data with not only what we collect, but also all of the river enthusiasts' observations. We meet with scientists, we meet with bass fishermen to really bring it all together to see what's going on and figure out what we can collectively do about it to save our river's grasses.
Sometimes you encounter pollution that actually prevents you from being able to do what you need to do, though.
Absolutely. We're already having reports of blue-green algae outbreaks that can be toxic. Last year, we had to not get into the water in several sites. And so if we run into something that looks like it's a problem, we'll take water samples to see if toxins are present. And then we can also share that with all the river enthusiasts in the area so they won't put themselves in harm's way.
And so what do you want to see if people want to get involved, what they can do?
Sure, absolutely. So they can go to our website at stjohnsriverkeeper.org. We'll be publishing our findings and reports every day. And there's simple things people can do every day to reduce their nutrient pollution footprint by using no fertilizer. It's the summertime, it's raining a lot. If you reduce your own nutrient pollution footprint, that helps the river, but then also work with us to advocate for policies as well as projects like reuniting the rivers that will help save our St. Johns River.
Well, Lisa Rinaman, Riverkeeper, thank you so much for coming on the program today, and have a good expedition.
Absolutely. Look forward to telling everyone about it when we return.
Okay. We'll look forward to it, too.